Hi, this is Georgina Villasenor. This is week 6 of our History and Theory of Public Administration course. Welcome to my presentation. So this presentation will cover public opinion that I was able to obtain on the topic of whether the Department of Education's scope should be expanded or limited. I will touch on a couple of theories according to public opinion that I obtained, and then close out the presentation. So what better way to obtain public opinion through social media? I was able to post an SOS for help on this topic through Facebook and generally asked, in your opinion, should the U.S. Department of Education scope be expanded or decreased, and why? The response I received, the first 3 responses were actually from teachers and administrators, 2 teachers and 1 administrator. So I will cover both sides. They were able to present both sides of the argument, and that's what I will be covering. 1 out of the 3 responses was from a teacher who is in support of expanding the scope of the U.S. Department of Education. One of the points that he brought forth was this concept of equality in funding through the fact that historically federal regulations have protected disenfranchised groups and ensured that through the passing of these regulations that they receive the same types of services. This concept of regulated federalism is present here with his argument. The fact that federal funding is contingent upon meeting certain criteria. So, school districts will receive money if they do A, B, and C. One can argue that according to the elastic clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that the federal government is responsible for the general welfare and therefore should continue to be, education should continue to be centralized. As far as theories are concerned, Appleby also talks about the need to be fair and to promote the public interest. And Selznick's theory also talks about social equity as well, and Waldo, he builds upon that. Our most current theory that is relevant here is Rivlin, who also supports the fact that federal government is efficient at collecting taxes and economic growth, that they are the ones who are capable of handling the funding, essentially. Another point that this individual who supports expanding the U.S. Department of Education, he talked about professionals and politicians. So this whole idea of Wilson's dichotomy and separation of powers, that they should actually work together to operate schools nationally, and locally, if one is not content, that we should be able to vote them out, to vote politicians out. So what came to mind here to support this view is Grodzin's theory, where he talks about intergovernmental sharing, and that funding and politics are the most influential factors when it comes to that. And I think this argument too can be perceived as indirectly as participatory democracy, and touches on the concept of informal cooptation, as Selznick's theory describes the importance of meeting the pressure of specific interest groups who have the ability to enforce demands, and I believe in this situation would be your parents or your families. 2 out of the 3 individuals who replied to my Facebook post, one was a teacher and another one was an administrator, he's a principal. They were actually in support of limiting the U.S. Department of Education's scope. One of the topics of discussion was the fact that these federal standards should not be universal because each area, state, have different issues, and so applying a universal standard of measurement is not effective. and therefore the federal government should not place these standards or impose them on the states. One of the examples provided was the No Child Left Behind law. So in order for states to continue or to receive certain type of funding, they had to implement certain requirements. Rivlin's theory is a theory that is relevant to this idea of basically decentralization. Rivlin talks about districts' different needs and problems and capacities, that they differ and that universal guidelines don't necessarily work. So the example given are issues that happen in more low-income areas like ghettos are not as effective as in other areas. Also, Rivlin talks about these performance measurements that they need to vary given the situation and the difficulties. Another topic that was brought forth was the political side of education, that politicians do not understand the practical side of education, and therefore they don't need to be involved. And so this, of course, relates back to the idea of constitutional separation of powers, and of course Wilson's dichotomy. However, the practical side of this is that it doesn't really exist. Selznick and Waldo also talk about the reality that policy and administration are intermingled. And so those are the theories that support this point of view. Thank you for taking the time to view my presentation. We have summer right around the corner, and I hope you enjoy your week.